Morning YouTube. I just want to spend a few minutes talking about morality, specifically about the idea of objective and subjective morality, partly in relation to Zomgit's Chris's video on objective morality and also to one or two responses, particularly Greatex and I think Gary on the Gloom Boom Doom channel made a response partly to Greatex and also specifically to Zomgit's Chris. I mean, to be honest with you, I think certainly the way that the words objective and subjective are being used are irrelevant in relation to morality. Not that those terms couldn't have relevance, but I think the way they're being used isn't relevant. And I think there's probably better ways of looking at it. And I think in order to get to the bottom of that, I would want to unpack the concept of some of the terms, the concepts that underpin morality, particularly concepts like good and bad. I'll just explain what I mean about this subjective-objective thing first. I mean, certainly some of the ways in which these terms are being used, for example, subjective, it's being used as a substitute for terms like idiosyncratic or personal or individual, autonomous, as if it's unconnected to anybody else, as if all of our feelings are completely, either completely under our own individual control or are completely unconnected to anybody else's, or are of a completely different order and are completely kind of arbitrarily chosen or arbitrarily handed down to us and necessarily separate from everyone else's. I mean, that seems to be where the discussion about subjectivity seems to hover, as if we talk about subjectivity as if it's as I say, completely personal and unconnected to anybody else and unconnected to any kind of general laws, guidelines, codes of practice, anything like that. On the other hand, objective as an alternative to that, and it's not a good alternative, is being cast in the role of a kind of transcendental absolute almost, as if by claiming that something's objective, it's almost platonic. It's it precedes, not just precedes. It's almost like a mathematical law. You know what I mean? It precedes the creation of the universe. I mean, it's almost being given that ultimately transcendent status, and neither of those are appropriate, I don't think, for certainly not for morality. And what I would want to do, I think, is to try. I think I talked about it before, actually, so it's very, very familiar. Anyway, I think what I'd want to do is to look at the roots of morality in terms of as a concept, or particularly those terms that we use when we're making moral judgments, particularly simple terms like good and bad. Because I think it was something in Gary's video, but I think it also featured in Zomgit's Chris's. This idea that suffering is bad. Suffering is bad. Of course, suffering is bad. It's obvious. Yes, suffering is bad. Suffering is bad whether it's a person doing it or whether it's a kitten doing it. Whether anything that can suffer, anything that is capable of suffering and does suffer, that suffering is bad. But I think that makes sense, not because there is this objective bad thing out there, this strange amorphous concept preceding the actual suffering, which you judge this act of suffering against. It's not as though we look at this piece of suffering and look at this kitten being squashed under a rock and then compare it to a range of possible values. Say, oh yeah, it seems to fit best in the bad category. No, I think it defines what bad is. It's one of the things that defines badness. It's not that suffering is bad, it's that bad is suffering. We understand terms like bad because we understand experiences like suffering. We understand terms like good because we understand experiences like flourishing. We have experiences ourselves, and we can sympathise and empathise with other animals with central nervous systems that display all the signs of suffering and display all the signs of flourishing and experiencing pleasures. So as I say, it's not that that the suffering is bad, or rather, it's a triviality to say the suffering is bad. It's like saying all unmarried men are bachelors. Of course they are, because being a bachelor is defined by the state of being unmarried. The experience of badness in terms of morality is defined by the experiences like suffering. I mean, I think there are other experiences as well, but suffering is a key one. I think we experience pains, and that experience, that fully embodied experience, provides a template against which to make evaluative judgments about fitness, about morality. It can't be the only thing, otherwise you end up with what's sometimes called a naturalist fallacy, which is where you you take nature as the template for all morality, and we can't do that. But it certainly provides the basic building blocks from which to build a morality. Okay, so I guess all I'm saying here, is that the subjective-objective dichotomy is, for me at least, not useful when talking about morality. In order to talk, particularly when you try to put something like suffering in it, is it objective? Is it subjective? It's both and neither. It's embodied. Suffering is embodied, and it's embodied in a way which makes us think, which makes us define what bad is. So yeah, anything that can suffer is is assisting in the definition of badness, and anything that can experience pleasure is participating in the definition of goodness and fitness and flourishing. So the flow of definition works in that direction, I would say, rather than the other way around. Well, that makes some kind of sense.